okay on the lover criterion either. How about timing, last resort? From what we know of the situation, Michael? Pretty good, I would say. Given the fact that the judiciary had just ordered people off the land, and that was in response to a big demonstration. So what does that tell us in terms of the famous escalation curve anyway? Remember, intensity of conflict versus time. We have this famous curve, and I mean, famous to me. And we divide it into stages, and this stage is characterized by what? Everybody remember? This everybody should have seen because it's on page 108 of my book. Alex? Appeals to reason still work. So you do conflict resolution here. That's a C, conflict resolution. And they had just had a, how many kilometers? 710-kilometer march with thousands of people, and this was not the first time they had done that. And the regime responds by saying, okay, we'll make it worse. So obviously we're not in the zone anymore. We have to be doing satyagraha. The question is, which is going to mean in this case civil disobedience, the question is, are we here yet? Which means you have to be willing to risk your life. And that is, I think I would agree, Michael, it probably was pretty good, but it's not 100% certain. I think if people were very, very clever and had really good leadership, I bet they could have figured out other things that they might have done and reserved the fast till really, really last minute. Like Catherine. That's very interesting, how to compare this dynamic, how to correlate this dynamic that we're talking about here and the timing of everything with the paradox of repression dynamic. That's an interesting question. I guess what you're suggesting is that you want to do something like that in such a setting that will evoke the paradox of repression and not that they will ignore you. Okay. That'd be an interesting test. If you had done the timing right, they would try to crack down or back down. It's a win-win situation for you and for the opponent eventually. I think we've done 4 out of 5, or have we done all 5? I think we've done all 5. Yeah. No. Doable. Is the demand doable? Obviously. Yeah. That's all they're asking to do is rescind a silly order that they just put in. So yeah. Now, I guess, if we wanted to really give them a weighted average or something, we would say they got 3.5 out of 5 rules, and by modern criteria, I think that's pretty darn good. By and large, I think most fasts are ill-advised that have happened since Gandhi and King, but occasionally not. But for certain, it is that if people really knew how the dynamic worked and how to use it, they could make it much more effective. So, okay, very good. This is very helpful. The farmers at this point sent a delegation on to Paris to speak to the President of the Republic, le Président de la République, Giscard d'Estaing, who refused to receive them. But when they arrived in Paris, 50,000 people turned out to greet them. So this was a kind of high point of the solidarity and support from the general population. Meanwhile, they did, given that the obstructive program was at an impasse, they did exactly the right thing, which was to go and do more CP, and they started building hospitals. But where did they build them? Can you guess, Andrea? On their land. They built it on land that was condemned. So you have a perfect blend, synergism of constructive and obstructive work. Because now look, if they want to come in and clear you off the land, they have to wreck a hospital to do that. That's not going to make them look too good. So that was a very smart move. I think we'll give them a 5 out of 5 on that one. And at that point, they began long negotiations with the Minister of Defense. So maybe we could, talking about that fast again, maybe what we should say is this. Insofar as the fast helped put them in a better bargaining position with the Minister of Defense, the timing was perfect. If the fast was intended to solve the question by itself, it was premature because they had some bargaining yet to do. And sometimes, we err in assuming that the opponent will not physically sit down and listen to us, and this is a very big mistake. I remember during the Free Cuba days, the Free Cuba Committee is bound up with some terribly dark stories in the history of this country. I don't want to go into the whole thing, but there was this group that was planning to assassinate the President of the United States, not because they had anything particular against him, but so that they could have their day in court and the Fair Play for Cuba Committee could address the public because the media were ignoring them. And needless to say, I'm not in favor of this technique. It doesn't come under any allowable exception for nonviolence. But more to the point, one of the people who was part of this plot to go and kill the president so that he could talk to his congressman said, maybe I can just go and talk to my congressman. So he went and said, I'd like to talk to the congressman. I said, sure, come in. So that was a much, much cheaper way of getting there. So, okay, we're in negotiations, and that's very good. But at the same time, 1,000 farmers decide to hand in their military papers, the famous papiers militaires, sung about in many French ballads. And here's a very clever move I want you to comment on. They decided to hand them to the UN. And they did. Intéressant, n'est-ce pas? Okay, so what are we talking about here? Given that there's no European Union yet. Maastricht is just a small city in the south of Holland where people go to college. What is the significance of this move in various levels? This is going to lead, I think, to a very interesting discussion, but only if it leads to some discussion. Yes, Michael? Yeah, it expands the circle, involves a third party, and what a third party. They didn't. Okay, Peace Brigades International doesn't exist yet either. That's just a few years down the road, but it's not like they handed them into the French office of the Red Cross or like the Warrior Sisters League. What they did, well, why am I making such a fuss about the fact that it's the UN? What's going on here? Not being Europeans, it may be a little hard for us to grasp this. See, what I'm getting at here is that they didn't just go beyond the two parties to a third party, which they certainly did. They went above the nation state. The argument on the part of the government is, this is, I almost said droit de seigneur, certainly not that, but this is eminent domain. This is about the fact that the national government trumps individual needs. And they're saying the national government is not the highest law on the planet either. And so this is a tremendous enlargement of the frame. So it was an extremely clever move that I think probably Lanza del Vasto did. And it gets us to another question within the whole movement. Maybe I'll put that off a little bit until we hit it again. And incidentally, there wasn't, here's another neat thing. That wasn't their first idea. They wanted to hand it in to the defense minister, and he refused to accept it. So they said, okay, we'll give them to the UN. So this is example number 942 of an oppressive regime doing something to make things worse for the resistor, only to find that it backfires. You know, I guess maybe our very first example we ever considered in this whole sequence was when in 1909 Gandhi wrote Hind Swaraj in Gujarati, and the British Raj refused to allow it to be published. They said, okay, I'll publish it in English, where it was read by millions more people, and now still a world classic to this day. And if you're doing your thing right, and you're bringing in the law of progression, everything is building nicely for you, a lot of these things will probably happen. Okay, yeah, Arby?
Do you think that the significance of giving it to the UN would be that maybe the resistors, the farmers and such, they think that they can't solve the issue with just the government?
Okay, Arby's question is, do I think that the handing of the documents up to the UN was because the farmers felt that the thing could not be solved within the country? I don't think so, because it was perfectly possible for the government to just back down and say, okay, this isn't such a great idea. Mind you, governments don't like to do that. You know, they lose face, whatever that is. But you remember one of the earliest in history example, probably that we considered ever, was the attempt to put a statue of Caligula in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem around 36, I think. And there's a huge uprising, and the local guard of the Syrian army, who's in charge of the area, he sends a letter to Caligula saying, maybe we should back down, this isn't such a good idea right now. Caligula immediately ordered him to commit suicide, thus getting himself assassinated. And our story ends relatively happily, except it would be much nicer if Caligula had a vision of Jesus in the middle of the night and got converted and said, I'm doing the wrong thing. Anyway, I'm sorry, back to our subject. No, I don't think, Jennifer, just let me answer one question. I don't think that was the issue, and this will, no, you can come in, but just let me finish my sentence. You know how I am. Hello, Maria, bienvenida. I think the issue was not that they felt that the government could not solve the problem for them, but that they felt the issue was much bigger than the French government and the French reforms. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. But now please join me in welcoming our heroines. Please come up. Bienvenida. Por nada. ¿Y ustedes, María? Sandra. Miguel Nagla. A vos les presento mis alumnos. ¿Pueden hablar en inglés? Okay. No, you don't have to. Mauricio? Sí. So please, yes, first I'd like to, I love hearing that stuff again. I think many of you know Jennifer Kuiper, who's the executive director of Meta, and she who's arranged this wonderful meeting for us.
Yo tengo una voz fuerte, creo que me escuchan. Yo también. No sé qué quieren que les diga. No, es efectivamente un inmerecido, no sé, es inmerecido el estar aquí. Estamos muy conmovidas porque no imaginamos que nos iban a invitar a una clase en esta universidad tan prestigiosa. Así es que estamos acá para contarles acerca de nuestro humilde trabajo y dispuestas a contestar las preguntas que ustedes nos hagan.
And we're available to answer any questions you guys have.
¿Situación en qué sentido? O sea, yo estoy oficialmente representando al gobierno de Costa Rica. Yo soy abogada del Ministerio de Justicia.
I'm officially representing the government of Costa Rica, and the Ministerio de
Justicia.
and the Ministry of Justice. A lawyer in the Ministry of Justice.
Evidentemente, oficialmente no puedo hablar de algunas cosas que siento.
I officially can speak of certain things that I feel.
Pero puedo contarles que en este momento hay una discusión en el país por el CAFTA,
Currently, there's a nationwide discussion on CAFTA
porque somos un país que nos caracterizamos por los extremos.
because we're a country characterized by extremes.
Somos muy chiquitos,
We're very small,
pero ricos y ricas,
rich.
pero muy vehementes cuando decimos algo. Ponemos mucha vehemencia.
We're very vehement when we speak. We have a lot of.
Entonces, en este momento, las personas que están ocupando los puestos de gobierno
Currently, the people in the government posts
quieren que pase el CAFTA, que se apruebe.
want to pass CAFTA,
Pero el pueblo
but the people
no está de acuerdo.
don't agree.
Se nos ha informado muy recientemente que como es una ley, el CAFTA, que debe ser aprobada en la Asamblea Legislativa,
We've been informed that since it's a law,
Which has to be approved at the Congress or National Assembly level.
porque tiene que convertirse en ley, ¿verdad? El señor presidente que tenía la iniciativa la ha retirado momentáneamente de la corriente legislativa.
so the current president has not passed it.
He's retired
He's
the treaty from the assembly.
Okay.
Eso no dice que no vamos a discutir el tema, pero que posiblemente con la presión que está ejerciendo el pueblo, ha decidido que por este momento mejor se retira el proyecto.
So that means that that doesn't mean that they're not going to address the situation, but for right now, what the people want, it's better not to address it.
Cuando venía para acá, me comentaba Jennifer que querían que hablásemos de antes de 1948. Les puedo hacer un hiperresumen.
I could give a brief account of pre-1948, which is what Jennifer had asked for us to speak about.
Hay algunas cuestiones, algunas cosas,
There's certain things, certain questions,
preguntas, algunas cosas que sucedieron entonces en el pasado y que es posible vuelvan a, o sea, que se esté dando, es como dice una sopa, un caldo de cultivo parecido 48 ahora, que es ánimos exacerbados, personas molestas, solo que en el 48 sí privó la violencia y hubo una revolución armada.
So maybe Marcos, you can help me out. That there's the same sentiments from 1948 as today. There's similarities. But back in 1948, there was violence. There was a revolution, armed revolution,
Y sí hubo personas muertas.
which resulted in deaths.
En esta oportunidad,
In this opportunity,
muchas personas están interesadas en que no haya violencia.
so many people today are very interested in not that there's to not have violence. So that's why they're interested in nonviolence, so that the same things won't occur again.
Y que se usen todos los principios, diálogo, verdad, amor, tolerancia,
So to use all the methods of dialogue and tolerance and love
para solucionar el conflicto
to solve the conflict
que tenemos en este momento.
that's occurring today.
Estoy muy feliz de estar aquí también. Muchas gracias por recibirme.
I'm very happy to be here as well. Thank you very much for having me.
Yo no trabajo para el gobierno,
I don't work with the government,
pero somos muy amigas.
but we're very close friends.
Pienso que en este momento especial, coyuntural, también es un momento de revolución.
I think that at this very special moment in time as well, it's a time of revolution.
De revolución en la mente y en el corazón.
And revolution in one's mind and heart.
Las armas son diferentes,
The weapons are different,
son el corazón y la mente.
the heart and the mind.
No las armas que usábamos antes, no vamos a matar gente. La gente se puede morir por falta de información y por terrorismo.
People may die from lack of information, from terrorism.
El problema del terrorismo quisiera hablarlo muy cortamente.
I'd like to briefly touch on the problem of terrorism.
El mismo septiembre, el 7 de septiembre, estuve en el World Trade Center bailando.
El 7 de septiembre estuve en el World Trade Center.
El último 7 de
I
septiembre.
was there dancing, the last 7th of September.
Y cuando pasó esto,
And when this took place,
decidí que yo no iba a ser parte del eco del terrorismo.
I decided that I wouldn't be part of the echo of terrorism.
Si había una especie de terrorismo que quería que nosotros nos asustáramos, yo no quiero asustarme.
There was this kind of terrorism which wanted me to be afraid. I decided I didn't want to be
Yo no
afraid.
quiero repetir la información para asustar a la gente.
I didn't want to repeat information to scare people further.
Quiero sacar mi amor y mi paz para combatir. No quiero terrorismo. Y el terrorismo es un grito de poder que no podemos hacer el juego. Terrorismo es vivir asustado.
I want to put forth my love and my peace to not respond to that shout of terrorism, which is designed to scare people.
Y es muy sutil la forma nuestra de ayudar sin saber el terrorismo.
And it's a very subtle way in which we all actually help out in order
Nos
for
impacta
it impacts us.
y cuando lo conversamos con otra gente, estamos siendo parte del juego del
And
terrorismo.
when we talk about it with other people, we're in a way being part to the terrorism.
Seamos cuidadosos con eso.
Let's be careful of that.
En Costa Rica, en este momento, la revolución está en las calles.
At this time in Costa Rica, the revolution is in the streets.
Y los mismos ciudadanos trabajamos en el gobierno part-time, pero también somos personas. Bueno, yo no, pero somos personas.
And at the same time, citizens that we may work in the government part-time, we're still people and citizens.
Y salimos a las calles a protestar. Nuestras protestas son con canciones, con pancartas de colores, con poesía.
And we go to the streets and protest with songs, with banners, colorful banners, with poetry.
Es decir, canciones, bailes. En la ciudad, downtown,
In the city?
y en las afueras, en todas partes.
And in all the outskirts of town, in all parts of the country.
El gobierno de Estados Unidos ha puesto muchísimo dinero
The government of the United States has spent a lot of money
para anunciar que el CAFTA es bueno.
to promote CAFTA.
Y nosotros no tenemos plata para hacer una contraparte,
And we don't have the money to counter that,
pero tenemos el poder.
but we have the power.
Esa es una revolución grande.
That's a one revolution.
Personalmente, para aprovechar este tiempo,
Personally, to take advantage of this
estoy
time,
trabajando con World Without Armies como coordinadora de un congreso en abril.
I work with World Without Armies for a conference in April.
El congreso se llama
The conference is called
Congreso para la Abolición de los Ejércitos de las Mujeres en Centroamérica antes del 2000.
a conference for the abolition of armies of women in Central America before before 2020.
Muy bien. Para esto, a World Without Armies tiene una propuesta para ir aboliendo el ejército, pasando de los militares a civiles.
And for this, the proposition of a World Without Armies is to go taking the army from military to civilian.
Esa es la consulta que vamos a hacer con las mujeres centroamericanas.
That is a consultation which we are trying to do with the women of Central America.
Vamos a hablar también de educación para la paz,
We will be speaking about education, peace education,
resolución creativa de conflictos
creative resolution of conflicts,
y desmilitarización.
and
Muy
demilitarization.
bien. Esos son los propósitos. El hecho de ser solo mujeres es muy importante.
These are our propositions. The fact that we are all women is very important.
Al principio, cuando yo fui invitada,
At first, when I was invited,
yo decía, ah, no, a mí me gustan mucho los
I
hombres.
said, "Oh, no, I like men too much.
Yo quiero incluirlos.
I want to include them."
Pero después entendí
But later, I understood
que hay una intimidad y una fuerza muy especial
that
cuando nos reunimos solo las
that there's an intimacy and something quite special when just women are united.
tiernas y dedicadas mujeres.
Delicate women,
Fieras para defender a nuestros hijos y nietos.
strong when it comes to defending our sons and our grandchildren.
Eso es, en general, es un pequeño resumen. Yo quiero hablar aquí todo el día, pero